Well, good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? We truly live in a blessed nation. We live in circumstances and times which are really marvelous and amazing when we stop and think about it, especially if we consider what it is that people throughout the centuries have had to go through and had, to put up with and had to deal with. In our nation, is celebrating its Independence Day, as it were. It'd be really easy. I thought about when Mark asked me to fill in for him this morning, it'd be a good thing to have an independence lesson on, our deliverance and from sin and how Christ brings everyone independence from that bondage and from that slavery, not just what, as a nation that was founded based on getting away from the British rule a couple hundred years ago, but the eternal independence. And that would be a good time and a good study, I think. But we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that this morning at all. I want us to look and consider this morning the idea and the concept of securing the heart. Securing the heart. What does it mean to secure something? We understand what security means, surely. Especially those of us that are homeowners, right? Homeowners, excuse me. Some of us even may have, elaborate systems, alarm systems to cover and protect to help make the things that we have inside of our home and our home itself secure. There's this company that has these cameras now that you can mount to your door that can see out to your porch and can record, because we're all interested in security, the protection of those things. And that's well and good. It's well and good, obviously. We have value. We place value on things. We spent money. We gave up our time and energies to our employers to be rewarded through money so that we could get the things that we have. Hopefully those things, of course, aren't idols to this, but nonetheless, again, it's foolish to say they don't have value because they do. And we want to keep them that way. We don't want anybody else just to be able to come in willy-nilly and take them. So we secure them. So when we understand this idea of securing, it's not a new revolutionary concept. But when we think about considering the idea of securing the heart, what do we think of? What do you think of when you think or hear of the term heart and that expression, the heart? Well, perhaps with some of us, and we have at least one in our audience that I know of, that it probably means a good deal to him, because his original one that he was born with, if you want to call it that, failed him. And he had to have another individual's heart placed in him. So we can think about that physical muscle. We can think about that organ as God, the Creator, and Jesus made us, formed in our bodies to help that system work according to His design. And so we understand that what that does is it provides that life-sustaining blood and pumps it throughout the body so that the body can perform its function and that it can work as a system. Again, that's something that's very natural to think of and consider when we think of the body. I reminded as I was getting these ideas together, the thump thump. If you remember, Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean, where's the thump thump? I'm glad somebody's, thank you, Peyton, give me a little bit. Other people, maybe you don't know what I'm referencing. It was funny. At least I thought it was. It struck my funny bone. But that's what perhaps that we think of. And we understand, of course, as we already expressed what it is that the heart does, then it, of course, has extreme value. And it really is almost irreplaceable, except for the standpoint if it's not replaced, life ceases to function. But as in our brother's case, he was able to receive a transplant to get someone else's heart in order to keep his system going. And let me ask, just for you to consider, what do you do, or what would you do, or what should you do to protect that heart? What do you do to protect that heart? Well, if you listen to the doctors, there's a lot that you should do. There are things that you should not eat if you're going to protect your heart. There are foods that you should stay away from. There are things that you should not put into your body. Chemical substances, drugs, and things that you should not place in your body if you want to protect your heart. Because we know that certain things will adversely affect how the heart operates. And that, of course, is detrimental to your longevity, to your life. The doctors would also tell you to do what? Exercise. Get up off of your chair, get out and do something for the sake of your heart. Because as we all hopefully know, whether or not we fully appreciate it, muscles that don't work do what? They disappear. You get atrophy. You can't do certain things when it's called on to do it. And sometimes that happens, doesn't it? When you're not used to working certain things and you go out to do a task or a job, like doing some gardening, out and hoeing some corn or hoeing some tomatoes, hoeing the dirt and getting the weeds out. I'm sure Willie can attest to, well, maybe not Willie because he's such a hard worker, that even during the winter months, I'm sure he kept himself busy. But perhaps, in the spring when he's first starting to garden, there may be a few mornings Willie would get up out of bed because he had, as we've talked about before, he had a nice garden. And he kept it up. He understood what it took to have a successful and a productive garden. But I'm sure he would get up some mornings after working and say, oh man, that doesn't feel quite right. Because it was a muscle group that hadn't been worked in a while. And again, we can identify with that, surely. And other things that, of course, that we would do to protect our heart is to seek medical advice. If things aren't going right. I had a few, it's probably 10 or 11 years ago, having this weird feeling in my chest. I still get it occasionally. Once a year now versus several times a week. So, I went to the doctor to see if there's something wrong. Did all kinds of tests on me, all kinds of EKGs. And you know what they found? Nothing. But you don't know. And when things don't feel right, of course, we seek medical advice. So those are things that we will do, and perhaps even more, to protect our physical hearts. We'll do those things and employ those things and those practices. But what's another consideration that we can think of when we think of the term or the word heart? Well, one of the things that we can go to, and that is very prevalent, is the fact that it is the source of emotion and passion. It is the very core of desire. It's what motivates, what drives a person to do a thing and to have a feeling or an understanding or an appreciation for something, because their heart, as we say, is what? Is in it, because they desire it, whatever that may be. We also may say that it is the mind or the essence of a person. The conscience is something that we can think of and we can put a serious credibility on when we think about this idea of what the heart is. And of course, if you believe some of the other companies that are out there, what is the heart? Well, it's that thing you follow. You follow your heart. You do what your heart tells you to do, whatever it is. If it feels good, you do it because you're following your heart. And obviously your heart is what? Your heart's right. Your heart is right. Well, we're gonna look at some things on those lines this morning. In our purpose of our lesson this morning is to look at more of this consideration, that the heart is, of course, being the essence of the person and the individual, the conscience, the thing which gives us passion, the core of our desire, our essence, and what we can do and what we should do in order to help to secure that part and that aspect of our individuality and what and who we are. And so as we look to that last expression about, following your heart, how can you follow your heart if it hasn't been properly instructed, if it hasn't been guided correctly, if it hasn't been trained correctly? How can you follow it? Well, we're going to look at some of those things this morning. And some may ask, but, Craig, there's a contradiction in Scripture. We can read in Jeremiah 17. So if you want to open up your Bibles and turn to Jeremiah chapter 17. If you really want to get a good, well, not if you want to, I would suggest to really get a good context of the verses we're going to look at this morning, you actually back up in Jeremiah, actually all the way to verse 14 of chapter 16 to start your reading, to get the framework of what it is Jeremiah is talking about here. And talking about, of course, he is expressing and he's calling the judgment of God down from what he's going to do to the people because of their disobedience, because of their sin, because of their idolatry, and what it was that led them astray. Because in verse 9, as we'll read, we'll pick up the reading there, it says, "The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart, test the mind, even to give to each man according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds. As the partridge that hashes eggs which it has not laid, so is he who makes a fortune but unjustly. And in the midst of his days it will forsake him. In the end he will be a fool." So there is pretty plain of why we wouldn't want to follow our hearts from what Jeremiah has expressed and what he has given us in this verse about it being deceitful and wicked above all. But if we look to Proverbs, let's go to Proverbs chapter 4, back up a few books. In Proverbs chapter 4, and in verse 23, actually we'll start in verse 20 of Proverbs chapter 4. "My son, give attention to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and health to all your body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life." And it's interesting, there's a version out there that says, above everything, of verse 23 now, "Above everything else, guard your heart, for it is the source of life's consequences." I kind of like that expression too, and understanding what it means about flowing springs of life, the consequences of our actions. And that's not a contradiction, of course, within the Bible that we have. That's looking at the fact that there are different ways in which the heart can either lead astray because it has been improperly trained, it hasn't been affected correctly, or what one should do to allow their heart to be properly trained and motivated. But as the Proverbs says, and as the preacher says, and that we have written there, that we just read in chapter 4, verse 23, he says to do what? Watch over it. Give diligence to it. Why? So that it can be your guide, Jiminy. Some of us remember Jiminy Cricket probably pretty well from Pinocchio. Let it be your guide. It can be your guide, but only, again, if it's been properly trained. So how do we get to the point to where we can trust our hearts? I'm going to turn to the family. I'm going to turn directly for attention for a little bit, of course, starting with the head of the family and talking to the dads and the fathers of your children. How can you help secure the heart of your children? Well, we know that the Holy Spirit directed Paul in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4 for fathers to do what? To train them up in the nurture and instruction of the Lord, but to do what? To not do what? Do not provoke them to anger. So there's a methodology and there's a way in which fathers are called to teach that they are responsible, they are accountable for when it comes to molding the young hearts that are under their care, because again, they're the leaders, they're the fathers. They have that responsibility. They have that duty and that calling by being a father that they take seriously. It's interesting that in Proverbs, over 20 times, the expression is used, my son. The preacher, Solomon, as he's writing this book, uses this expression, my son, in direct connection with his providing instructions to his son about following, about heeding, about looking after for, about caring for, about doing, about executing what it is that he has been instructed, about remembering what it is that he has been instructed. And we could go through a whole list. Chapter 1, verse 8, 3:1, 4:1, 4:10, 4:25. We could go on and on and on. At least in the New American Standard Version, there are over 20 different times that expression is used about that. So again, fathers, what are you doing for your children? Are you helping them cultivate a secure heart in your training and in your instruction? Are you bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? And are you doing so in such a way that they are not being provoked to anger in what you're doing? Very serious responsibility that we have. And it's also interesting that in that same book of Proverbs, that over 14 of the expressions, the preacher basically begs his son to connect his heart, the child's heart, with either the instruction from God or from him in what he does and how he conducts his life. That's not a mistake. The whole book of Proverbs, of course, is an excellent how-to in being a father and what you should do for your children to help them have secure hearts. So fathers, be that. Be that type of leader in your homes. Be that type of example and an influence to your children. Understand what's at stake in that you can help give them a leg up, as it were, in this world by properly training them so that they know what to do, so that they can, in fact, follow their heart. Because Proverbs also says what? Train up a child in the way that will go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. He won't, because you as a father, you did a good job. Not that you, of course, take pride or be arrogant in that, but you just simply help your children to avoid certain pitfalls and certain things that I'm sure that you would want them to avoid. Of course, we can't talk about the family and stop at fathers. We have to also remember moms. Mothers, you too share in this responsibility of raising and instructing your kids. Again, going back to the book of Proverbs in chapter 1 and verse 8, what does the proverb writer say there? He tells his son to listen to what? His words, and to hear what? his mother's instruction. So, moms, you don't get a pass. Wives, you don't get a pass. You are just as responsible to help teach your children and train them up to give them a correct heart as the fathers do. Follow in their footsteps. The dad takes the lead. The wife and the mom, hopefully, is there to support and uphold those things. Not say, well, you wait till your father gets home. That's one thing I'd never heard in my house, except maybe twice, I think, when I was growing up. And it was to the point where I had really done something really, really bad. And Mom just said, no, you're gonna face your father over this one. And of course, it didn't end well for me. But again, understanding that you also have a proactive role to play in providing instruction in the training of your children's hearts. And it's interesting that also that in Proverbs 31, which probably was not penned by Solomon, but it says there in the first 9 verses that the writer of that proverb gives credit to who for the instruction? He gives credit to his mother. In Proverbs 31, the words of King Lemuel, the oracle which his mother taught him. And his mother taught him about the sin, or more importantly, the pitfalls and the traps of being an alcoholic. Staying away from strong drink. Staying away from getting drunk. It has no place in the life of a king. It has no place in those sorts of things. What you need to do, in verse 8, is to open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all the unfortunate. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and the needy. That proverb writer gives credit to his mother for teaching him that. And what a good teaching it is, too, to look out for others, to take care of the needy, and to do that which is right, and those warnings to stay away from. So again, mothers, you have a very important and active role in helping to promote hearts that are secure and that can be followed by the small people, by the little small people that you now may be holding, but one day will be walking on their own and out on their own. And so help them in that respect to be able to follow their heart. Of course, what's the last component of a family? It's the kids. It's the kids. The kids also, the children, have an obvious role to play in this, and theirs is what? Very simple. Thank you. I heard it. Obedience. Obey. And in this, what I can tell you, kids, if you're listening to me now, if you're listening to me, allow yourself to be shaped by the training of your parents. Don't fight them. Don't get in their way. Don't say, Mom, you're dumb. You don't know what you're talking about. Dad, please. You know, that is so 20th century. Boy. Listen to them. Allow your hearts to be shaped by the training of your parents. We can go back to Ephesians chapter 6. Again, what the Holy Spirit directed Paul to write is he is talking to the family and the family unit directly when he said, Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is what? This is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, so that that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. You have a reward here. You have a reward here, and it actually transcends whatever might be happening here on earth in your life. I mean, that's a part of it that it could protect. You know, the reason why, we tell our kids not to stick keys in an electrical outlet. It may prolong their life. It may help them out. But how much more so, of course, when we're thinking about their souls. And giving them the tools, giving them a foundation that they understand how that they can then shape and think their own way and shape their thoughts to be in line with that of what it is that would make God happy and not just merely to make mom and dad happy. And we've already mentioned, in numerous times that took place earlier in the book of Proverbs about how children are encouraged, the son. And again, when we talk sons, don't read, like we said before a few years ago when we did our family series, and the elders gave the series on our worship series on the family. It's not just the guys. Sons are family. Sons are children. Daughters, you're included in that. So make sure that you are following that. And again, understand that it is for your benefit. It is for your benefit that you do these things, and that you accept and you allow your hearts to be shaped by what it is that your parents are trying to instruct you in. So what about the rest of us? Show of hands. Who's been a mother, a father, or a child? I think that pretty much covers the audience. In some shape, form, or fashion. We all fall under one of those three. We all fall under one of those three without fail. But you may say, well, you know what, Craig, I didn't have good parents growing up, or I didn't have any parents growing up, or I had one really, really bad parent growing up. And my parents were totally lacking in this sort of training and didn't discipline me. Well, we're going to look at a few things. And again, as we're keeping our focus and our thoughts on securing our heart, I'm going to start with this blunt statement: do not trust your heart. If that was your upbringing and that was your situation, where you didn't have the blessing of being raised by a mother and a father that wanted the best for you, spiritually speaking. I'm not talking about an education. I'm not talking about getting that, six-figure job. I'm talking about your stand and your responsibility to be an accountable soul before God on the day of judgment. If you didn't have that, then do not trust your heart. Do not, Jiminy Cricket, allow your conscience to be your guide, because you can't trust it, because it wasn't properly trained. That may be hard to hear, but that is going back to exactly what we just read out of Jeremiah, that the heart is full of deceit. And it is something that cannot be trusted if it has not been properly trained. We can understand. We look at what Jesus stated. We looked at what Jeremiah said. Let's take a look at what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 15. Matthew chapter 15, beginning in verse 15. We understand this is Jesus explaining the parable to them about what goes in the body, what goes in the mouth doesn't matter. What's important is what comes out. And Peter asked for an explanation of that parable. And Jesus said in verse 16, Jesus said, "Are you still lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach as eliminated? But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, slanders. These are the things which defile the man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man." Jesus makes it quite clear. It's the outpouring. It's the outcome of things. It's our actions. It's our attitudes is what is the expression of our hearts. And this is something that every single one of us need to keep in mind when we're considering whether or not we're following our hearts. Another thing we need to not do is to trust the teaching of men. I'm going to put a little asterisk by that. Let's go back to Proverbs chapter 1. Starting in verse 10. We already talked about in the first few verses where we talked about verse 8, to hear the father's instructions and to not forsake the mother's teachings. But in verse 10 he says, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us, let us lie and wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole as those who go down into the pit. We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with spoil. Throw your lot in with us, that we will have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path, for their feet run to evil, and they hasten to bloodshed. Indeed, it is useless to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush their own lives. So that the ways of everyone who gains by violence, of everyone who gains by violence and takes away the life of its possessors." And so Solomon very wisely warns his son about this training, about this influence, about this teaching of peer pressure, if you will, about understanding that, yes, you'll have people, you'll have guys, you'll have your comrades come to you and tell you to do certain things. Don't listen to them. Don't follow that. Remember what it was that you were taught. And so, when we understand that we are not to trust the teachings of men, we got to be very careful. I mean, there's all kinds of really interesting, I'll put it that way, material out there that is supposedly written for the purpose of helping people to be more godly. Be careful. Be very careful in those sorts of things that you may pick up or you may have recommended to you to read and accept it as authoritative, because it's not. There's only one thing that is, and that is God's Word. And so we need to be careful. We need to secure our hearts against those forms of other types of communication, regardless of how motivating they may sound and how logical and rational they may sound. That could be the deceiver hard at work to lead you astray and to make shipwreck of your faith. So be very cautious and be careful about the teachings of men. But what do we look for? Of course, we look to the Word and the wisdom of God. Going back to Ephesians chapter 6 again. After Paul wraps up his teaching on the family, he shifts to a military analogy to draw some points about service and about preparedness. And we understand, we've probably, depending on how long we've been here, we've probably sat through a couple of VBSs that talk about the armor of God and the things that we are supposed to put on. I taught it, so I know that there are kids that have been affected by that, impacted by that. But in verse 10, he starts out, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God so that you will be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, stand firm. Stand firm, therefore, having girded your loins with truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. In addition to all, taking up the shield of faith, with which you will be able to extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. The equipping of the Christian soldier is with items that aren't physical. There are physical analogies that, of course, we're connected with. But what do we look at when we find what it is that protects and secures the heart? We have the breastplate of righteousness, the very thing that surrounds the top of the body to help protect that vital and important organ. But what is righteousness? I always love Steve's definition of that. Right wayness. Right wayness. Righteousness. Well, how do we understand what is the right way? Righteousness can only come through the Word of God. It is the right way, and it is what it can secure our hearts that we need to key in on. So how do we know the right way? Well, we have to have the proper attitude toward it and its authority. And we're going to read a few other verses here. Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 3 again. Starting out in Proverbs chapter 3, starting in verse 1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For the length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so that you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. Let's go over to the book of Psalm. Go back to Psalm 19. Again, looking at our attitude towards how we should perceive God's holy word. Starting in verse 7 of Psalm 19, the law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are righteous altogether. They are more desirable than gold, yes, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them your servant is warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Acquit me of hidden faults. Also keep back your servant from presumptuous sins, and let them not rule over me. Then I will be blameless, and I shall be acquitted of great transgressions. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my Redeemer. That is the attitude that we should all have regarding the Word. We can also look at Psalm 19. There are a couple of segments in there. Let's turn to one last one, though, for the sake of time, to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4, beginning in verse 12. Hopefully a passage that we have committed to our memories, that we understand is completely and utterly foundational to our understanding and how it is that we should perceive God's Word. For it is what? It is living, it is active and sharper than any two-edged sword, and piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, of both joints and marrow, and able, it has the ability to, it has the right to judge the thoughts and intents of the heart. There is no creature hidden from His sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of with whom we have to do. So we understand, as the Hebrew writer expressed, there's no getting away. There's no getting away from this Word. And so we need to make sure that our attitude is proper towards it, and that we hold it in the highest regard as authoritative, and that we do our very best. We do our very best to follow it and stick with it. The springboard for this sermon is a song that I have been thinking about for months. How Shall the Young Secure Their Hearts? By Isaac Watts. How shall the young secure their hearts and guard their lives from sin? Thy word, what was it? The word? The choicest rules impart and keep the conscience clean. 'Tis like the sun, a heavenly light, that guides us all the day, and through the dangers of the night, a lamp to lead our way. Thy word is everlasting truth, how pure is every page. That holy book shall guide our youth, and well support our age. Ben, I'll ask you to advance the slides. We're going to go ahead and sing this. How shall the young secure their heart? How shall the young secure their hearts and guard their lives from sin? Thy word the choicest rules impart to keep the conscience clean, to keep the conscience clean. 'Tis like the sun, a heavenly light that guides us all the day, and through the dangers of the night, a lamp to lead our way, a lamp to lead our way. Thy word is everlasting truth, how pure is every page. That holy book shall guide our youth and well support our age, and well support our age. Hopefully that will connect with you, and you'll consider the purity that your heart should be to be able to follow it, and to allow God's Word to guide you, to rule and govern your conscience. Again, we are all young. The song says, how shall the young? And it may be more directed to a younger audience, but we all are young, because what? We all are teachable. We all have opportunity to improve. We all have, hopefully, a desire to do that improving and to become stronger. And so we can benefit from understanding this without a doubt. It's only when we kneel before God's throne and we submit to His will can we find the security for our hearts, that we can understand what it is that we need to do to be in line with Him and His teachings. Will you allow your heart to be secure in the love of God and His Son? Securing your heart, thus establishing your hope of heaven and to enter His rest at His coming. One final passage, Hebrews chapter 6, beginning in verse 17. In the same way, God desiring even more to show to the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of His purpose, interposed with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is possible for God to lie, we who have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Will you take hold of that hope this morning? Will you renew that hope this morning and draw on that cord of Jesus Christ as your anchor and secure your heart in your service to Him so that when you're found faithful at the end, you can enter into His rest? If we can help any this morning, we pray that you come as we stand and as we sing.